Hey, this is Seth Parnell, the minister at the Portia Church of Christ, and this is episode 107 of the Midweek Bible Study. Hope that you are doing well. Hope you are having a good week so far. I know it's been a beautiful day down here in Jonesboro. I hope you had a equally good day where you're at. We always appreciate you being here, whether you are joining us right now or whether you will watch us later on. We appreciate your presence and your willingness to be here to study the Word of God. Because we always know that time spent, studying God's Word is something that is always worthy of our time. And so we appreciate everyone being here. And like I said, I hope you've had a good day. We always want to extend an invitation if you're someone that is in the Portia area. And right now we're meeting at 10 o'clock and 11 o'clock on Sunday morning and 5 o'clock on Sunday night and 6 o'clock on Wednesday night. We are located at 307 South Jackson Street in Portia, Arkansas. And so if you're in our area, we would love to see you. We would love to talk with you. If you're in our area around one of those times, I hope you feel welcome and free to drop on in. We would love to talk with you and to worship with you and to get to know you as a Christian body should. And so hope that you can take advantage of that if you are in our area. As I said, we always love to see you. Also, we want to let you know that if you have any questions or comments about what we talk about tonight, or if you have need further explanation about something, then please feel free to get in contact with us as well. I'm a pretty easy guy to get a hold of, and so we don't want any misunderstandings or anything out of sorts. And so always feel free to get in contact with us if you have any questions about what we study here tonight. Our goal here is to gain a better understanding of the Word of God and to apply that to our lives as Christians, which is something that is, I think, is a time well spent in doing. But as we said, we're so glad that you are here today. We're here every Thursday at 7 o'clock, and so we hope you will join us next week as well. But tonight we are studying Acts chapter 12. And I'm not by myself, but we have a special guest with us here tonight as well. Andrew Hitchcock is here with us, and he's going to be joining us for the study. I know you're going to enjoy his perspective. He's a smart guy, and you're going to enjoy what he has to say. And so, Andrew, it's great to have you here. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Well, thank you so much for having me on the show, Seth. Appreciate you calling me a smart guy. I don't know if I would call myself that. But my name's Andrew Hitchcock. We've moved to the Northeast Arkansas area about 6 months ago. Before that, we were living close by in Detroit, Michigan. I work for a company based out of Seattle called Alpenglow Biosciences. We make 3D microscopes.
That's pretty interesting. 3D microscopes. I know both Andrew and his sister went to college with me down at CRC, and so we've known each other for quite some time. But what have you been studying on or teaching on lately? When you look at your approach to the Bible.
Well, when we lived up in Detroit, I was teaching a class at our church on Wednesday nights, going through the four Gospels like synoptically. Am I saying that right?
Yeah.
And just to try to get to understand Jesus better. I don't mean to be cliche in saying that, but I think that's something that we all could do better. To get to know the Gospels more, and especially studying them all together instead of just doing a study of one on its own really helps you to get a good picture of like the different perspectives of the different authors, and really helps to get a clear understanding of the picture as a whole.
Yeah, there is a reason why we have four different Gospels, and like you said, they're written from different perspectives for different audiences, and to get a full picture of who Jesus is, that's not something you can do in just a snap of a finger, but it takes you could spend a long time looking at who Jesus is and kind of what that means for us. And so that's definitely a great study to have. It's good to have some people here with us tonight. We have Kathy Davis. She's here with us. I hope you had a a safe trip. I know you've been on the road this week. We got Glenda Johnson here. She says she's listening. Good to have you here. And the Tillmans as well from Ravenden. I hope you guys had a great gospel meeting up in your area, and we appreciate you guys being here tonight as well. But tonight we are studying Acts chapter 12. Acts chapter 12 in an interesting story where we find one of the you might say the adventures of Peter and his cohorts. He's someone that went through a lot during his time, and you can imagine, at least I imagine, some of the things maybe that they went through that aren't recorded in the Bible. We know there's probably a lot of stories that they had that aren't recorded for us to read. But even what we do have to read is pretty spectacular at times. Peter is someone who went through a lot, in his during his ministry, of the gospel. He's someone who started out as a fisherman, and he ended up in Acts chapter 2 being someone to preach that gospel sermon, the first gospel sermon, which is quite a journey. And we know that even after he preached that sermon, it was still something. He still had a lot of work to do, and he would have a lot of trials to face. But this is an exciting time. The church is growing, and they're facing a lot of problems. But in Acts chapter 12, we find Peter gets arrested, and he is someone who is going to have to face this trial of being imprisoned because of his faith. You might say there's no other reason why Peter was imprisoned, but because he was a Christian. And so, to me, there's some interesting parts of the story. There's some kind of deep parts. There's even some humorous parts in the story when you look at some of the things that happen. But Andrew, what is your first thoughts when you think about this story and this kind of breakout, this escape that Peter has in Acts chapter 12?
Well, it's one of those stories that I think it's hard to really understand the gravity of, because it's something that I think if you grew up in the church, especially, you've heard it so much, but it's hard to comprehend, thinking of an angel helping somebody escape, it's humbling, and it's impressive, but it's also right off the bat for me personally, it's just hard to think about, because I don't have anything to compare it to. I don't have any, I guess that's what I'm trying to say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's the angel's role in this is interesting. We read about angels in the Old Testament, and we read about some of the spectacular things that they did. And here we find in the New Testament, one is still active. He's still doing the work of God. And this is a common thing you might see in movies or in a book, where someone is in prison or someone is captured and they have to make an escape. But the difference here, with this story, we might see is that Peter, as we'll see, reading throughout this, that he didn't even know he escaped until he was on the outside. And because the angel was someone who led him, out of that prison, completely safe and without any trouble. And Peter, he thought he was having a vision when he realized, well, this actually happened, and he was able to be free from that. But it's definitely it's interesting, interesting to see, because at this time, as you said, the church was growing quite a bit, but this is where a point in which the persecution has turned up, just a bit. We know from Acts chapter 7, Stephen was martyred, he was killed, and then Paul ravaged the church in chapter 8, and this is kind of the next step, as we'll see what happens to James and what has happened here to Peter, because of it. But to kind of set the stage and to kind of set the picture of our discussion here. What was the world like during the time in which this story takes place? The time in which the church is going on and Peter is imprisoned because of this. How would you describe the world that he lived in?
Well, and again, I'm no expert on ancient history, But I know that the Romans were, at large, they were in charge. And not only that, but to be oppressed by the Romans and by the Jews would have been a scary thing. The Christians, despite the church growing, was still a fairly small group compared to everybody around them. And I can't imagine the pressure that there would be to just kind of fall over and deny God. I mean, think about how hard it is today in America when we're not even facing like death. The worst we're facing is like people screaming at us on the internet, or like, I guess if you own a business, you might lose your business, but that would be the worst thing that would happen. Nobody's, outside of some very extreme circumstances, nobody's going to come to your house and crucify you. Nobody's going to behead you in prison or throw you to lions just because you're a Christian. I can't imagine how scary but surreal it would have been to be in this situation, and how commendable it is that they stayed faithful.
Yeah, it's this was a difficult time for him, because like I say, it's one thing in order to face opposition from the Romans, because Romans, you might expect that to happen because the Romans were kind of the enemy when it comes to the national perspective. But really, their biggest enemy, the one who had the biggest problem with them, was the Pharisees and the religious authorities and the those on top that had the biggest problem with them. And like I said, there really wasn't any safe space that they could go to, any like as earthly authority that would protect them at this point. And so they had to be reliant on what God could do for them, and they had to navigate what this world threw at them. And if you look at the first couple of verses here in Acts 12, we'll see what kind of comes before this imprisonment that Peter has. And verse 1, it says, "And about that time, Herod the king laid violent hands on some who belonged to the church. He killed James, the brother of John, with the sword. And when he saw that it pleased the Jews, he proceeded to arrest Peter also. This was during the days of unleavened bread. And when he had seized him, he put him in prison, delivering him over to 4 squads of soldiers to guard him, intending after the Passover to bring him out to the people. So Peter was kept in prison, but earnest prayer for him was made to God by the church." And so Herod was someone who, it says that he laid violent hands on some who belonged to the church. And so even though James is mentioned here, I don't think James was the only one. I think several other people probably were killed by Herod, even though James is probably the most high profile person that was killed. But he does this, and he sees that this gets him some political favor with the Jews. And so he says, well, if it worked with James, let's get Peter in here and let's do the same to him. And so he was planning to execute Peter just like he did with James. And he sets him in the prison, and says he set 4 squads of soldiers to guard him. We know that a squad of soldiers was about 4 soldiers. And so there would be kind of 16 soldiers that would kind of rotate 4 at a time to guard Paul. They'd have 4 different watches, and so these soldiers would keep Peter under constant watch. And we know that later on in the story, he'd be chained to one soldier on one side and another on the other side. And so this was maximum security for Peter. By all means, Herod did not want Peter to escape. And so he made sure that there was no way that he could get out of this situation. And because he wanted to make sure that he got the favor from the people for persecuting Christianity. And this is the situation that Peter kind of finds himself in here in the first part of the story. And I think this story is a great great story of deliverance, but there's some good things there's some problems as we see that Peter's going to have throughout the story that he's going to have to address. And so Andrew, when you see this story and you think about some of the problems that that Peter faced, what are some of the obstacles that kind of stood in his path or that he faced in the story?
Well, there's the obvious of like, being imprisoned, the chains, the guards, the soldiers. But I think beyond that, there's like the emotional obstacles that he faced. Despite being with Jesus and having the Holy Spirit as a helper, I think that there would probably a lot of times where Peter was, he's still a human. He still gets scared. Despite the physical obstacles, I think the emotional obstacles might have maybe even been more severe. Think about, he just saw James die. Well, maybe he didn't see him, but he knows James is dead. I would wager he knows James is dead. God didn't save James, and again, I know that Peter had the kind of faith, or I assume that Peter had the same faith that we see so often talked about in the Bible. It makes me think of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego when they were talking to the king, and they said, we know God's able to save us from the fire, but even if he doesn't, we're still not going to bow down to you. Peter knew that Jesus was Lord and that he had the power to save him from whatever Herod had in store for him. But even if he didn't, he was still going to stay faithful. But it's still a scary thing, that would still be a huge obstacle. I know it would for me. Mustering up that courage and, keeping that courage would have been the biggest obstacle for me.
And that's one of the things that kind of strikes me when you read about Peter's behavior in the story. If you know Peter, if you know the type of person that he is someone who is kind of characterized as a kind of a hothead, someone who has a temper, someone who is always on the forefront, sometimes putting his foot in his mouth, but he always gives you 110%. That's who Peter is. All throughout the scriptures we read he's like that. He tells Jesus, when they come and try to arrest him, he says, Jesus, so I'll go down fighting for you. I'll die with you. Right here. That's the all in type of person that he was. But in this story, Peter seems remarkably calm. He seems remarkably at ease when you read about how he's described in the story. He's in chains, and he says that he was fast asleep, that he was sleeping when the angel came. There's no indication of panic or of anxiety. I mean, I'm sure there was. Like I said, I'm hearing what happened to James and everything. I'm sure there was, but it's not described here in this case. So knowing that those two things, like he seems at peace with this what seems like inevitable. He's going to meet the same fate, that he's going to be killed just like James, but yet he kind of accepts that, and he trusts in God, kind of like you mentioned with Shadrach and Meshach and Abednego. Like he accepts, the possibility that he may, go down just like James, but yet he knows that there's nothing he can do at this point, but it's up to God in order to take this. And
well, maybe this was even kind of like, think about when Peter denied Jesus, when Jesus was on trial. Maybe this was kind of like in his mind, he's like, all right, this is my turn. I get to not deny Jesus this time. And
yeah. That's a great point. I mean, because the denying Jesus story, you kind of imagine he thought about that all the time. Like maybe it's something you don't forget, at least from what at least from how I read the story. And so, and from what we read, that's a mistake that he didn't make twice. He never denied him. He still had some of his issues that he had to work through, but he didn't deny Jesus and his association with him. And this time he's he's making no attempt to separate himself from Jesus, but he's fully accepting that. And it kind of makes me think when we face some trials, and when we face some unfortunate situations in our life, how do we react, to the things? How do we react to the things that we, cannot change, that we have, no power over, that we, can't affect, with what we do, Sometimes it's a tendency for us, to worry, for us, to be so anxious about, about those things. But I think in this case, like Peter, he took this with a sense of peace and calmness, and accepting that, the best what was going to happen. And I think that's a lesson, or that we can kind of look to. And because there's things we should always do our best in order to, do our part and change what we can. But there are things in life, like I said, that we cannot change. And if we worry about those things all the time, that's going to kind of drag us down. But Peter was someone who fully trusted in the deliverance that God had. And like I said, he wasn't going to deny him in this case. But he's someone who is all we have a lot of Peter. We have a lot of information, about him. And so there's some good things that we can learn from him, and that we can, kind of take from his character and how he interacts, in this case. And so, Andrew, what are some good things that we can learn, from Peter, and that we can kind of take from him as far as maybe his character, his mindset, his actions, how he operates in this, unfortunate situation? What are some things that we can learn from the man Peter?
Well, like you pointed out a moment ago, Seth, he seemed to be very calm and at least contained,
Yeah.
I think that's something that we can definitely admire and pray for, that kind of mindfulness, to realize that, yeah, I'm in a bad situation, but, God's in control, and we don't really, we're not citizens of America anyway. We're citizens of heaven. So whatever happens, then that's not to say that we should just go around being reckless, of course. But I think in addition to that, Peter seems to be, you mentioned he has been kind of a hothead in the past, but he was also, he acted. He was a man of action. And sometimes it can be so easy to be passive about things, and to be too afraid to act when we know that maybe we should. And I think that's something that we can, instead of being passive when there's persecution around us and just kind of not speaking up and, not standing up for the word of God, having the confidence and the boldness to, to speak where the Bible speaks, and to stand up for what's right, no matter what's going to happen, just despite how, shoot, Peter literally was just killed. To have that boldness to continue on, I think that's just absolutely incredible, and definitely something we can pray for in ourselves.
Oh, absolutely. And it's good to have David Huston here. Good to have you here. Hope things are going well on your end from Rockford, Illinois. But yes, because if you read throughout Acts chapter 5 and read about some of the problems they had there, in which the apostles were brought before the court, they were threatened. They said don't preach the name of Jesus. Basically saying, or else or we're going to severely hurt you. He knows what happens to James. He knows what happens to Stephen and to all those individuals. Like, this is not a mystery to Peter. It's not really a surprise, it seems, but yet he's still someone who was doing what he was doing. He was still active in this ministry. And so I think that's an excellent point. Are we someone who is willing to stand up when we know that there might be consequences for it? Are we someone who is willing to be a Christian when it's easy? Or are we willing to be a Christian when it might cost us something, when it might be something that provides negative consequences? In Peter's case, this was matter of life, and death. He was going to face, death in this case. And as you mentioned before, the stakes aren't as severe for us as far as physically, at least in our part of the world. But we still do have that challenge. We have that thing to do, when we are presented with how we live our faith on the outside and how we take action on it. And or do we leave it, as something that is a passive faith, or are we someone who is constantly, glorifying God by what we do and by what we say? It's Jesus talks, many times about, counting the cost, about, carrying your cross, about, doing the things with Christianity that are difficult. And it's something we have to be willing to do if we're going to be someone that is I think that lives, walks that narrow road, as we should. But we also know that that Peter, he was someone that wasn't perfect, we know, and we know that he had some issues, to work through, as we kind of alluded to, earlier, and so what are maybe some kind of negative characteristics that we could take a look at, from Peter? And I think specifically in this story, I don't think there is too many that kind of stand out and hit you in the face, and but in your mind, maybe what are some negative things that we could take a look at here from Peter in this story?
Well, in this story, like you said, I don't see a whole lot in this story here that I would point at and, point at negatively, but definitely in the life of Peter, there are a lot of, there's a lot of good examples and there's a lot of bad examples too. I mentioned, we talked about him being a little bit hot-headed. He was a man of action, but sometimes he acted without really thinking things through. And boy, has that gotten me in trouble before.
Mm-hmm.
Learning from his mistakes and learning that it's okay to take time and think before you immediately, decide, hey, we should make a tabernacle for you and for you and for you. It's okay to take a moment and think about things before you act. Even when you're excited, sometimes it's good to remind yourself, you might be excited about something and you just act out of excitement or out of passion. Was it Peter that cut off Malchus's ear?
Yeah.
Another example of being passionate. Passion is great. Passion is awesome. But sometimes taking a moment to think about what your passion makes you do can help you do something better. And I think Peter is a great example of, a great teacher on the negatives of what can happen when you don't.
Yeah, that's definitely, I think that's a great lesson to take from him, because I would say he was kind of like, Paul was someone who made the statement. He said, "I've done everything in good conscience." Even when he was persecuting the church, he thought that was what he was meant to do. That was he was supposed to do. And Peter was kind of the same way, even though he was off base. I think at some times, I think he always, had good intentions. He had, kind of, positive, outlook on these things. But yet, sometimes we have to be someone, like you said, that thinks about the effects, of our actions, the effects of what we do, maybe how it influences others, or maybe how it influences us. Because sometimes, the worst things that can happen to us, are things that build up over time, bad habits that develop, over time. And if we think about how those little things, affect us, maybe before we enact them or before we do them, that can maybe save us some trouble from down the road. And then you can look at, a myriad of examples. We often, when you look at James chapter 3, and we talk about how powerful our words are, how powerful, it is of what we say to other people, how that can affect them. It's so hard sometimes in order to to control what you say in the right manner. And a lot of times you think about that after you said something, which is which is too late, because we know you can't take something back.
Yeah.
But it's definitely, it's good to be cautious. And one thing about being a Christian is that, we try to see everything through that lens, of our faith. And so, we have to ask ourselves a question, does this impact my faith, in a positive or negative way? Do these words impact my faith in a positive or negative way? Those are questions that we have to ask ourselves, or we need to ask ourselves, as we're going about. And because we don't want to be someone who has good intentions but does, the wrong things because we didn't, think them through. And like I said, I think Peter is a kind of a good example of that. But to kind of get us caught up, on the story here, we know that he was was thrown in prison. He got, he had a soldier on each side. And in verse 8 here of Acts chapter 12, or in verse 7 here in Acts chapter 12, it says, "And behold, an angel of the Lord stood next to him, and a light shone in the cell. And he struck Peter on the side and woke him up, saying, 'Get up quickly.' And the chains fell off his hands. And the angel said to him, 'Dress yourself and put on your sandals.' And he did so. And he said to him, 'Wrap your cloak around you and follow me.' And he went out and followed him, and he did not know what he was doing. He did not know what was being done by the angel was real, but thought he was seeing a vision. And when they had passed the first and second guard, they came to the iron gate leading into the city. It opened for them of its own accord. And they went out and went along one street, and immediately the angel left him. And when Peter came to himself, he said, 'Now I am sure that the Lord has sent his angel and rescued me from the hand of Herod and from all that the Jewish people were expecting.'" And we have, after this, we have from verses 12 down to verse 17. We have his coming back to the house of Mary, and kind of the instance in which they happens here with these individuals. But so we know that, I find it kind of interesting, that that Peter is, sitting there, between the two guards, and all of a sudden, someone hits him on the side and says, "Hey, get up. You have to break out of prison today." It's, he might have been, dreaming about a fish or something, or going out, on the water, and all of a sudden he's got an angel hitting him and saying, "We got to go." And so they do. And even though there was two soldiers at the gate, there was two soldiers by him. He was bound in chains. There was an iron gate. There was a door. There was the first and second guard. All of this was standing in the way. Something that is absolutely impossible for for Peter himself to get out of. But yet, when the angel shows up, all that doesn't matter, and he's able to lead him out. Peter thinks he sees a vision. But then when he comes to himself outside, he realizes, well, wait a minute, this is real. God has sent his angel in order to deliver me. And so Peter's first reaction for this, his first thing that he wants to do is in verses 12 and following, when he goes to the house of Mary, and he wants to tell the people, what happened. And so what do you get kind of from the reaction that these Christians had from Peter's story? And when he comes there, and when he wants to, and it takes a little bit for him to get in, but he wants to tell them, how what God had done for him. Do you get what do you get from the reaction the Christians had from Peter's story?
Well, I try to have a little bit of sympathy for the Christians that are at Mary's house, because I'm a huge skeptic when it comes to really everything. It takes a lot for me to believe something that I am, convinced isn't going to happen. And I have to have a little bit of sympathy for the Christians that were praying there when the servant girl comes along and she's like, "Hey, Peter's at the door," and they're like, "No, he's not. That can't be him," Because I would probably be doing the exact same thing. I would probably be, there's like an iron door. There's like 16 guards, he's not getting out. And gosh, when he comes in, I can't imagine the shock, and of course as a Christian, you believe in God. You believe that, God created everything. So of course he has the ability to, surpass any obstacle we would, try to put in someone's way. Of course God can, get Peter out of jail, but still it's one of those things that you're just, I'm almost at a loss for words. And I imagine I would be too, standing among the Christians praying in Mary's house.
Yeah, a girl named Rhoda, which I think it means rose in Hebrew, but she comes and Peter knocks on the door, and she goes to him, and she realizes that it's Peter, and instead of going to unlock the door, it says for her joy she ran back to tell them. And I find it interesting that it says in verse 14 it says that she recognized Peter's voice. And in verse 16, it says Peter continued knocking, like he was still out there knocking because no one would open the door for him. But they had prayed, for the deliverance of Peter, and this prayer, God went above and beyond to deliver, this prayer. And you kind of like you said, you get the sense that they expected God to do something, but maybe not do something, this big. Or this grand, to put Peter at their doorstep, the very next day.
Yeah.
That was something that's big, and I'm sure that they had confidence in the power of God and his heir to deliver. But I don't think that they realized just how big of something that God can do. And like you said, there sometimes God is someone who he chooses what he does, and he chooses the things the things that he does. But we should have confidence as Christians about not only the ability for God to deliver, but also the power in which God has to deliver, and the how he can turn an impossibility into something that is reality. And how he can take impossible circumstances and make them anew. And like I said, I probably would have been right along with you. I probably would have thought this was something born out of imagination or something. How could this be? But eventually Peter does make his way into there, and I think it's in verse 17. As soon as Peter gets in there, he motions his hand for them to be silent, and he wants to tell them about his story of deliverance, and he does. And then it says he departed and went to another place in order to, we assume in order to encourage, maybe more Christians about what God had done for him. And so God had taken something that was a very dark situation in which Peter had execution looming over his head, and he had turned that into an event of great encouragement. Peter could go around telling the Christian about what God had done for them, and that could inspire them to be more bold in their faith as well, and to be someone who can who is not afraid of what persecution they might face. And so I always find that, it's awesome how God can take, events that are bad and turn them into something that is actually encouraging and inspiring. And I think he certainly does here in this case.
Absolutely.
But as we kind of start to wind down this lesson and kind of reach the end of our text here, what is something you think we can learn from God, from the story? I think we've already maybe touched on it, quite a bit, throughout this this lesson, but maybe kind of give us maybe a reminder of what are some things that we can take from God, in this story.
Well, the first thing that stands out to me, the biggest thing that stands out to me, is just how shockingly powerful prayer can be, and how how amazing and powerful God really is. They were praying for Peter to be free, to be delivered from prison, or for something good to happen. and bang, it happens. They weren't prepared for the timing and the effectiveness that their prayers had. And it's something that is humbling and awesome to think about. When we get worried in our lives. I've heard people on the internet talk about how they'll say, well, praying is the least you can do. And really, no, it's not. It's like the biggest thing you can do. It's the most important thing you can do. It might take the least amount of effort, but that's because God is so big and God is so powerful, and it's so easy to be discouraged and afraid and worried, and just to be reminded how, number one, how powerful God is, but also how this world isn't our home. There is a better place for us, and to have that trust that if it's in God's will, He can make all of our problems go away. But even if they don't, we've got a better place waiting for us anyway. So,
yeah, we know that. I think we can say that God is powerful, and God is also accessible. And those are two things that don't always go hand in hand. When you look at things in this world, we know that, like in our country, the president has a lot of power. He has a lot of authority, with his position. But if I want to go have a conversation with the president, I can't do that. I'm going to be, I'm going to be arrested and put away like Peter, and I'll be chained to two soldiers. But God is someone who's different. Even though He has the power and He has the ability to deliver, like I said, Peter, from these impossible situations, He's still accessible. He's still someone that you can talk to. He's still someone you can pray to. And that's something that I think is big, something we should never lose sight of, that God is someone that you can actually, talk to, and you can be honest with. You can pour your heart out, to God. And it says that, in this story, that the Christians, they prayed, earnestly, that they prayed, passionately. And I think if we're someone that is honest with God, and if we're someone that prays with passion as well, I think that's something that is that we should be invested in, because God cares about us, and He cares about what we say, and that's a wonderful thing to remember, as a Christian, especially when you consider all the things that God can do. But Andrew, we appreciate you so much for being here tonight. Do you have any closing thoughts on this story of Acts chapter 12 and Peter's escape from prison?
I think it's sad. It's interesting and kind of sad to point out the last little verses 18 through 19. Think about the soldiers when they woke up. Imagine waking up with a prisoner that you're supposed to guard, and all of a sudden he's gone. Like, there's no explanation. You didn't let him go. None of your other soldiers, at least you're pretty sure none of your other soldiers let him go. But, he's gone. What are you going to do? And then, I guess we can read what happens. But still, aside from that, maybe on a deeper level, just one closing thought. Again, I know we said it. It's just so humbling and amazing to read stories like this, and to know that the same God that did all of these things is the God that we can pray to today. The God that freed Peter, the God that came down to earth to live the life of a human, the God that made everything is the same God that you and I can speak to. And despite being an incredibly flawed person that I am, I can still pour my heart out to God, and I can still ask God for forgiveness. I can still do my best to follow His word and be His servant. I think that's just so awesome.
Yeah, and that's definitely something to keep in mind. Later on in this book of Acts, during the later chapters, Paul's going to come in contact with a man by the name of Herod Agrippa, and that would be Herod Agrippa II. This man here is Herod Agrippa I, and like I said, he would be quite furious. He was quite furious, with the guards when he realized that Peter had escaped, and he wasn't going to get the political favor that he had. And so, kind of the rule was that if you were someone that let a prisoner go, then you took his place. You took the punishment that he was going to get. And since Peter was going to be executed, they were executed as well. And so, yeah, they definitely didn't have a good ending. But this story is one, like I said, that has a lot of broader meaning that we could take a look at. And I think it's something that I encourage you. I encourage you to read throughout the entire chapter. Read and see what this has to say. Read it for yourself, and because it's a good story to read, and I know you'll get a lot out of it as we do. But I said, Andrew, we so appreciate you being here tonight. I think we've had a good study, and we appreciate your good insight. If somebody wants to reach you or get a hold of you, how could they do so?
Well, I'm on Facebook. Sorry, Seth, I didn't get my contact information to you ahead of time, but I'm on Facebook again. Anybody can reach out to me on Facebook. It's Andrew Hitchcock. I think my picture is my profile picture. I think it's me and my wife and our daughter. But it's, if anybody's interested, Facebook really is the best way to reach me. I guess I could also leave my email. I could post my email in the comments. If you're listening, my email is hitchcock9528@gmail.com. But maybe I'll write it in the comments too, if anybody's interested. How do I write a comment? I don't think I can write a comment because I don't have I'm in a guest account. Anyway, if anybody wants to get a hold of me, Facebook's probably the best way.
All right. Well, we wish the best for you. Hope everything goes well, and we'll have to have you back sometime.
Definitely. This has been a pleasure. I'd love to be back.
All right. I hope that this is something that has benefited you. I hope this has encouraged you or lifted you up. We'll be back here next Thursday night for another. Or actually, we won't. We won't be back here next Thursday because I'll be at church camp, and so we're gonna have kind of a 2-week break for the midweek Bible study. And so next week and the week after that, there will be no episode for the midweek Bible study. Just kind of give you a heads up. But we'll come back at the end of the month, and I know we have some guests lined up. And I know that you're going to enjoy what they have to say. But until then, until we meet again, I hope that you have a wonderful day, and I hope you can glorify God in everything that you do. We'll catch you next time.